They threw away my wedding dress while I slept, so I gave them what they deserve. I woke up that morning not because of the ache in my wrist, but because of a sound drifting down the hallway. It was Vanessa's laugh. It was sharp, the kind that does not come from joy but from spite, and I had learned over the years that this kind of laughter usually meant something of mine was being handled, judged, or destroyed. "What is this supposed to be?" Vanessa said, her voice slicing clean through the thin air between us. "A cheap old wedding dress? Who does she think she is, holding on to this like someone actually remembers her wedding?" I froze before I even opened my eyes. My heart beat the way it used to when Samuel knocked on the door late at night after a long shift. Except this time it was not warmth I felt. It was dread. Then came the voice of my granddaughter Brianna, bright and cruel, in the effortless way only the very young can manage. "Just throw it out, Mom. She has lived too long anyway." Hey both laughed, and I heard the distinct scrape of the box being dragged across the carpet. I lay still because I have learned that staying quiet in this house makes things easier, or at least prevents them from getting worse. But my body betrayed me with a trembling breath that gave me away. Vanessa must have heard it because she said, louder this time, "Oh, look at that, she is awake. Maybe now she will finally let go of this useless junk." I sat up slowly, feeling each year of my life press against my bones, and saw her standing in my doorway with the dress box clutched under one arm. She looked at me the way someone might look at a stain on the wall they intend to scrub away. I wanted to ask her to put it down, but the words got trapped behind my teeth. I used to speak freely, I used to laugh loud enough for neighbors to hear, but in this house silence feels safer, like armor. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Darren insisted I move in after the fall, saying it would be safer than living alone in my old house. He insisted I would be safer here. "You should not be alone, Mom," he had said, and I believed him because he used to be the boy who held my hand crossing every street. But somewhere between marrying Vanessa and building a life centered around her comfort, he had become someone I did not quite recognize. And my presence, instead of being a mother's presence, became an inconvenience. I saw it in the way he avoided meeting my eyes during dinner, in the way his voice tightened whenever I asked about his day. Vanessa stepped fully into my room without asking, as if my space was an extension of her authority. She set the box on the bed and flipped the lid open with theatrical disgust, wiping her hand on her leggings afterward, as if touching my belongings contaminated her. "Honestly," she said, "this is embarrassing. Darren and I are trying to keep this house looking modern, and this old thing is just clutter." Brianna hovered behind her, leaning into the doorway like a shadow that had forgotten how to be soft. "Grandma, why do you keep things no one cares about?" she said. "It is weird." I wanted to tell her that once she had worn my pearls while she played pretend and how she giggled the whole time, but I did not say anything. Those memories would mean nothing to her now. Vanessa lifted the dress from the box, letting it unfold in her hands, the lace still delicate despite its age. My breath hitched because that dress was the first thing Samuel ever called beautiful. He said it even before he said it about me. "This has no place here," she said. "You are living in our home. We get to decide what stays and what goes." When she said "our home," something inside me twisted. I had never corrected her, not even once, even though the truth was different, even though the deed had belonged to Samuel and me long before Darren was born. But keeping the peace felt safer than confronting the storm she carried in her voice. She gave the dress a rough shake, the way people shake crumbs off a tablecloth, and something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way old trees split under the weight of too many winters. My fingers curled into the blanket. I forced myself not to reach out, because reaching out always gave her an excuse to call me dramatic. She smirked, stepping backward out of the room with the dress dangling from her hand. "Come on, Brianna," she said. "Let us take this outside." Brianna followed, glancing at me only long enough to say, "Maybe now your room will not smell like old people stuff." I waited until their footsteps faded before I let myself breathe again. Even then, the air hurt. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and pressed my palm to my wrist, the one Darren said needed protecting. But standing there in the quiet, I realized something I had tried not to admit. This house was not a place of protection at all. It was a place where I was disappearing, one belonging, one memory, one breath at a time, and the sound of that dress leaving my room felt like the sound of the last part of me being taken. When Vanessa walked out of my room with my wedding dress, the past rose in my mind so sharply that for a moment I was no longer in that small, suffocating house, but standing in the church hall of my youth, holding the warm, calloused hands of Samuel Ridgemont. I could still smell the lavender my mother had tucked into my hair, the faint scent mixing with the beeswax candles that lined the aisle. Our wedding was not grand or expensive. It was the kind of ceremony where neighbors brought pies instead of gifts, and the music came from an old phonograph that skipped every few songs. But everything about that day felt whole because Samuel was whole, and he made me feel that way too. He was a tailor back then, known for steady hands and a patient spirit, and he had sewn my dress himself on evenings after long workdays. It took him months, not because he lacked skill, but because he wanted each inch of lace to look like it had always been meant for me. My mother, Evelyn, came over often to help, trimming stray threads or adjusting the bodice. One evening she pressed her lips together in a quiet smile and said she wanted to add something of her own. She threaded a single line of green stitching along the inner hem, whispering that green meant life, growth, and a future she hoped would treat me kindly. Samuel pretended it was unnecessary, but later that night he admitted he loved knowing a piece of her blessing would be wrapped around my ankles with every step I took toward him. At the time, I had no idea that dress would become something far greater than a garment. I just knew it made me feel like I belonged somewhere, like I was stepping into a world both fragile and safe. But after the war ended, safety no longer felt simple. Sometimes Samuel found me sitting up in bed, shaking and clutching the blanket as if the world were about to collapse again. He never scolded me, never rushed me. Instead, he gathered small bundles of lavender, dried and wrapped carefully in cloth, and slipped them under my pillow. "Breathe this, Clara," he would say. "Let your body remember peace." I slept easier on those nights. So when he stitched a tiny sachet of lavender into the lining of my wedding dress on our first anniversary, it felt like a promise that no matter how loud the world became, I would always have something soft to return to. He sewed it in the place closest to the heart, explaining that he wanted the scent to rest near the part of me he loved most. I remember laughing, telling him that no one sewed herbs into clothing. "Then it is not strange," he said. "It is tradition now." Years passed, and the dress only grew more precious, not because it was made of lace, but because it was made of moments. I kept it folded carefully in a cedar box, wrapped in muslin, and whenever we moved houses, Samuel insisted on carrying it himself. After he was gone, I continued the same habit. I would take it to a small dry cleaner run by an elderly woman who knew how to handle delicate stitching without disturbing the seams. She never asked why lavender sometimes slipped from the folds. She simply replaced the muslin, pressed the lace, and returned it to me with the respect people nowadays rarely show to anything old. That careful preservation was why the fabric never yellowed and why the lining, even after so many decades, still held its secrets. Samuel was the one who hid them there, though at the time I did not know that the dress had become more than a symbol. He chose the dress because he knew it was the one thing no one would dare to tear apart or examine closely. He used to say that clothing told stories, and sometimes, if crafted with enough care, it could carry more truth than a locked drawer or a safe. "People do not rip open what they do not understand," he once joked, and I had smiled without understanding what he meant. But now, remembering the quiet weight in his voice that evening, I think he had already begun to worry about the future, about whether kindness could survive the years that shape people into strangers. The last night of his life, he held my hand so tightly I felt the tremor in his fingers. The hospital room was dim, and machines hummed in a rhythm that felt wrong, too steady compared to the faltering breath in his chest. I pressed my forehead to his hand and whispered that I wished I could trade places, that I did not know how to live in a world without him. He brushed my cheek, and whispered the words that still echo through every empty room I have walked into since. If the day ever comes when the world turns against you, remember this, Clara. I never did. I did not know then how much I would need those words. I did not know how cold a home could feel when love is replaced by resentment. But standing there now, remembering his voice while Vanessa dragged away the last piece of him I had left, I felt something shift inside me. Pain, yes. Loss, yes. But beneath that, something else. A stirring I had not felt in years, something that felt almost like strength awakening from a long sleep. Darren was not always this way. Before Vanessa, he was the kind of boy who would run home after school just to sit beside me while I cooked, telling me every detail of his day, as if nothing in the world mattered more than making sure I heard him. He used to kiss the top of my hand before bed, the same way Samuel did, and he would say things like, "Mom, when I grow up, I hope I take care of you the way you took care of me." I held on to those words for years, believing them the way mothers believe in summer after a long winter. But after he married Vanessa, everything shifted, like someone had reached into his chest and rewired the man he was becoming. I tried to understand her in the beginning. She grew up in a small, cramped house on the rough side of town, raised mostly by relatives after her mother died young. I knew the ache of losing a mother, even though mine lived longer, and I tried to treat Vanessa with warmth, but she watched me with those guarded eyes, always waiting for some imaginary insult I never gave. One afternoon, before we ever lived together, she pulled Darren aside at a family cookout. I could not hear her words, but I recognized the set of her shoulders, the way she folded her arms like a shield. Later that evening, Darren told me she felt uncomfortable around me, that she thought I judged her upbringing. I remember staring at him, stunned, wondering how a woman who barely knew me had convinced him of something so far from the truth. It only grew worse after their wedding. If I complimented her cooking, she accused me of sarcasm. If I stayed quiet, she said I was sulking. If I offered help, she claimed I was trying to interfere. Somehow every gesture became an offense, twisted through the lens of her insecurity until I was painted as the villain standing in the doorway of her new life. I once caught her crying on the porch when she thought no one was watching, clutching a photo of her mother, whispering something about how she wished she had someone to teach her how to be a wife. For a brief moment I wanted to comfort her, but the walls she built around her grief were barbed, and each time I tried to get close, she pulled Darren tighter and pushed me further away. And Darren, dear God, that boy who once trusted me with every fear he ever had, began to bend toward her without realizing how far he was bending. She had a way of making her needs sound like emergencies and her wants sound like obligations. "If you love me," she would say, "you will put us first." Or, "Your mother had her chance at life. This is our time now." It started small. He stopped calling as often. He skipped our Sunday breakfasts. He let holidays pass quietly, always apologizing with the same tired line. "Vanessa is stressed, Mom. I need to be there for her." Then, guilt turned into distance. Distance turned into avoidance. And avoidance, in time, turned into something colder. When he asked me to move in after my fall, I believed he wanted to help. I did not know then that it had been Vanessa's idea, not from kindness but convenience. She wanted me close enough to use, but far enough to blame. Once I was under their roof, she made sure every interaction reminded me of my place. She told Brianna that I was fragile, slow, too old to keep up, and within months the child who once ran into my arms now rolled her eyes at the sight of me. "Grandma is just a burden," she said once, while scrolling on her phone, repeating it with the same casual tone children use when they talk about the weather. I wanted to correct her, to tell her that nothing about caring for family is a burden, but when a child's mother plants seeds of contempt, the roots grow fast and deep. Sometimes I would walk into the living room and find Vanessa whispering to Darren with her back turned to me. He would glance up with guilt flickering across his face before masking it with the same worn-out smile he used when he was a boy caught breaking curfew. "Everything okay?" he would ask, avoiding my eyes, and she would place a hand on his arm as if to pull him back into her orbit. I saw the pattern clearly long before he did. She needed him to choose her, not because love works that way, but because insecurity does. And each time she said, "If you love me," she carved out a piece of him that belonged to me, to his childhood, to the years when my voice guided him more than hers. I watched him disappear inch by inch until the only version of him left was the one she approved of. It is a strange grief, losing a child who still lives under the same roof. It is like mourning a home that still stands but no longer belongs to you. And the worst part was knowing he could not see it. He thought choosing her meant abandoning me was the price of adulthood. He thought loyalty had room for only one woman at a time. He thought he was growing. But all I saw was a man shrinking to fit inside the narrow space Vanessa allowed him. I should have known something was wrong the moment Vanessa called it a family photo day, saying it the way people say holiday or tradition, as if the word itself carried warmth. But there was no warmth in her voice, only that clipped cheerfulness she used when she wanted to disguise cruelty as organization. She stood in the living room with her hands on her hips, directing Darren and Brianna like she was arranging ornaments on a tree. "Stand over there, sweetie," she told Brianna, smoothing the girl's hair so aggressively the child winced. "Darren, bring the light over." "No, not that way. You will cast shadows." I hovered near the hallway, unsure if I was meant to join or witness, but hoping quietly that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of moment families stitched into holiday cards. Darren saw me first. He hesitated, his mouth parting just slightly, but he looked toward Vanessa before he spoke, as if obtaining permission. "Mom," he said, "we are getting the camera set up." "I can help," I offered softly, though I did not know with what. Vanessa turned, lips curving into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, Clara," she said, dragging my name out like a sigh, "we want the photo to look clean." I did not understand at first. Clean? "A certain aesthetic," she continued, waving her hand as if sculpting the air. "Modern, cohesive, you know, a look." Brianna snorted and whispered loudly, "It means Grandma does not fit the vibe." The words hit harder than she knew, though perhaps her mother knew exactly how hard they would land. Vanessa tilted her head at me, examining my sweater, my slacks, my old hands folded together. "You always wear such heavy colors," she said. "It makes us look poor on camera." My chest tightened, the way it used to when Samuel would wrap my scarf too tight by accident, except this time there was no warmth in the pressure. "I could change," I murmured, but Vanessa shook her head. "It is not just the clothes, Clara. The whole look is—" She paused, searching for a polite word before abandoning the attempt. "It just throws everything off. We want this to be perfect. So maybe you can sit this one out. Just this once. Just this once." People say that to make cruelty sound temporary. But cruelty, once unleashed, rarely stops where it starts. I stepped back into the hallway, out of the frame they so carefully curated, and watched as the three of them arranged themselves in a picture meant to tell a story that did not include me. I watched Darren put his arm around his wife, watched Brianna lean into them, all three smiling in a way that suggested harmony. I wondered if my absence improved their harmony or only made space for the illusion of it. When the shutter clicked, something in me clicked too, a quiet crack, the kind that travels through stone slowly, almost invisibly, until one day the whole thing splits. After the photos, Vanessa announced that the house needed a cleanse. She said it with the tone of someone presenting a solution rather than a demand, but the message underneath was unmistakable. "Clutter weighs down the energy of a home," she said, with a pointed glance toward my end of the hallway. "We need to clear out old vibrations." She walked into my room without knocking, the way a landlord might enter a storage shed. "This has to go," she said, lifting the crocheted blanket I had spent months making after Samuel died. "And this," she added, tossing aside my framed wedding photo with no more care than if it were junk mail. Darren stood behind her, shoulders slumped, offering small, useless protests. "Vanessa, maybe let Mom decide." "Darren, please," she snapped. "Do not undermine me in front of her." In front of her. As though I were a child, as though my presence diminished her. Then she reached the drawer where I kept Samuel's letters pages he wrote from the repair shop when business was slow, little notes where he told me he missed me or described the way the afternoon light fell on the sewing machine. She picked them up, fanned through them, and wrinkled her nose. These are depressing. Who keeps things like this? We are trying to create a new atmosphere. Before I could speak, before I could plead, she dropped the entire bundle into a trash bag. It made a dull sound when it landed, like a heart hitting the floor. I reached instinctively toward her, my hand trembling, but Darren stepped between us. "Mom," he said quietly, "please do not make this harder." Harder for whom? I wanted to ask, but my voice had already retreated somewhere deep inside me. Then, as if the day had not already scraped me raw, Vanessa opened the cedar box at the foot of my bed. The wedding dress lay inside, wrapped in the muslin I had replaced year after year. She touched it with the same disdain she might show a moldy rag. "This," she declared, "is the center of all the stagnant energy. It needs to go today." Brianna, eager to assist, grabbed the edge of the muslin and tugged, nearly dropping it onto the floor. "Be careful," I blurted, the words escaping before I could swallow them. Vanessa shot me a look that could have cut rope. "It is old fabric, Clara, nothing more." But it was not nothing. It held my mother's blessing in green thread, my husband's lavender sachet, and every quiet promise that had shaped the life I once knew. When they lifted it out of the box, I reached for the ring on my finger without thinking. My wedding ring. Samuel used to spin it gently whenever I was anxious, telling me the circle meant no ending, only continuation. I twisted it now in the same motion, as if seeking the reassurance his touch used to bring. Vanessa tossed the dress onto the growing pile of what she called negative attachments. She added the blanket, the letters, the photo, piling them on top of each other as if none of it carried weight or memory or breath. "We will turn this room into a yoga space," she said, clapping her hands, satisfied with her own vision. "It will be good for the energy of the house. Clara can sleep on the sofa. It is just down the hall." Brianna grinned, already imagining her mother stretching on the mat where my bed had been. Darren looked anywhere but at me. I watched them dismantle the last pieces of my life, each object falling like a small death. And in that moment, feeling my ring press against my skin, I realized something heavy and unspoken. They were not cleansing a room, they were erasing me. I waited until the house was quiet before I walked out to the trash bins behind the garage, moving slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I barely noticed it. The only thing I could see was the outline of the garbage bag where Vanessa had thrown the pieces of my life. I pulled it open with trembling fingers, and the smell of detergent and dust rose up, almost familiar, almost a relief. I dug through the pile until my hand brushed the muslin wrapped around my wedding dress. I lifted it carefully, afraid the fabric might tear after everything it had been through. But it held, the way it always had. When I brought it inside, I did not go to my room. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I could not risk them walking in and calling this a scene. I sat on the closed toilet lid with the dress across my lap, smoothing the lace the way Samuel used to smooth my hair when I was too tired to speak. As I ran my hand along the lining, my fingers found something unusual, a seam that did not match the rest. My breath caught. I leaned closer, gently tugged, and the fabric gave way just enough to reveal a fold of paper tucked deep inside, right where the lavender sachet had once rested. For a moment I thought I was imagining it, that grief or hope had blurred into something unreal, but it was real. My hands shook as I pulled out the small bundle, wrapped tightly in waxed cloth. Samuel's handwriting was the first thing I saw. The sight of it made my throat close because handwriting carries more truth than a voice ever can. I unfolded the cloth and found 3 items. A document titled Marriage Addendum, an original property deed with my name, only my name on it, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in Samuel's steady script. My heart pounded so loudly I could feel it in my palms. I opened the addendum first, reading line after line until my eyes blurred. Samuel had met with a lawyer nearly a decade ago. Samuel overheard Vanessa one evening when she thought he was asleep, whispering that she was just waiting for Clara to be gone so we can finally have the house. The document stated that in the event of emotional abuse, coercion, or mistreatment, I would retain full authority over the house and all decisions regarding residency. It named me as the sole protector of the property, prohibiting any family member, including Darren, from claiming rights to it if I was ever made to feel unsafe. My breath hitched as I read the date again. It was signed on the same week Vanessa moved in after her wedding to Darren. I remembered that week. I remembered the way Samuel watched her, quiet but attentive. The way fathers sometimes observe storms gathering on the horizon. I set the addendum aside and reached for the next document. The deed confirmed everything. The house Darren loved to call his home had been secured under my name long before he grew into the man who now avoided my eyes. I did not feel triumphant. I felt stunned, small, shaken in the way people shake after barely surviving something they did not know was dangerous. Finally, I opened the letter. The envelope tore gently, as if even the paper wished to be kind. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice. I recognized his handwriting immediately. The loops of his letters, the slight tilt to the right, the calm of a man who never rushed a single stroke. "My Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, then something has happened that I hoped would never come to pass. I know you save every memory, not because you cling to the past, but because love has always been your way of remembering who you are. I have seen the way Vanessa looks at you when she thinks no one is watching. I have heard things that were not meant for my ears. She may not be cruel by nature, but insecurity is a dangerous thing, and you deserve protection from anything that could ever make you small." I stopped reading, pressing the page to my chest for a moment. There was nothing dramatic in his words, only clarity, the kind that comes from a man who loved me with a steadiness I never had to doubt. I kept reading. "I met with a lawyer to make sure you would never be alone or cornered. I wanted this house to be where you could grow old safely, surrounded by the things that matter to you. People change, Clara, and sometimes they forget what they owe the ones who raised them. This is my way of making sure no one can take from you what you built with your own hands, even if the world turns cold, even if voices rise against you, even if those who should protect you choose convenience over loyalty." My eyes stung, but I forced myself to read the final lines. "If the day ever comes when the world turns against you, remember this, Clara. I never did. You are not alone. You were never alone. Use these papers if you must, and do not hesitate. Love should not require you to endure cruelty." When I finished, the room felt too small for the weight of what he had left me. In my lap lay the truth I had needed long before I knew to look for it. Samuel had not only loved me, he had seen what I was, too stubborn, too hopeful, too motherly to admit. He had seen the danger before I saw the cracks. And he had armed me with the one thing Vanessa could never manipulate, protection written in his hand, backed by the law. I folded the documents carefully, placed them back into the cloth, and sat there for a long time, feeling not victorious, but awakened. They had taken my memories, but Samuel had given me something far stronger, a way to reclaim my life. I did not expect the truth to arrive with such precision, but Harold Benton was a man who understood timing. Vanessa had spent the entire week planning her house refresh party, calling it an event to celebrate new beginnings, though the only beginning she cared about was the spotlight on herself. By late afternoon, the living room was filled with her friends, most of them women she admired for their curated perfection on social media. They walked through the house, complimenting the decor and pretending not to notice me as I sat on the back porch, invisible but present, like an old chair someone is too polite to throw away. I heard them praising the clean energy and the modern aesthetic, all phrases Vanessa recycled from the videos she watched. Their voices floated through the open windows, overlapping with glasses clinking, Brianna's shrill laughter, and Darren's forced attempts to play host. I stayed outside, wrapped in my shawl, watching the sun rest on the rooftop across the yard. It should have been a peaceful moment, but peace does not exist where you are unwelcome. The wooden boards beneath my chair creaked as I shifted, just enough to remind myself I was still here, still real, still more than the discarded memories they had swept into trash bags. When the doorbell rang, the noise inside quieted for a moment, then swelled again with curious chatter. I heard the door open, heard a few polite greetings, and then heard Vanessa's voice rise with confusion. "Can we help you?" she asked. Harold stepped inside, his tone steady and polite as always. "I am here for Mrs. Ridgemont," he said. His voice traveled through the house like a breeze cutting through stale air. Vanessa froze. I could sense it even from the porch. Harold walked past her without waiting for permission, his leather briefcase in hand, and when he reached the back door, he met my eyes with a small nod. "Clara," he said. "It is time." I stood slowly, my legs careful but my heart certain. The moment I stepped inside, the room shifted. Conversation stopped. Glasses lowered. All those women in their curated dresses turned to look at me as if the ghost of the house had just decided to walk among them. Darren blinked in confusion, his smile dying before it had fully formed. "Mom?" he said. "What is going on?" Vanessa moved to his side, placing a possessive hand on his arm, the same way she always did when she feared losing control. "This is a private gathering," she snapped. "Whatever business you have can wait." Harold did not look at her. He looked at me. "Clara," he said again, "would you like me to begin?" I gave a small nod. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the documents, holding them with the kind of reverence most people reserve for fragile art. Then, with the calm authority of a man who had spent a lifetime ensuring the law was honored, he cleared his throat and addressed the room. "My name is Harold Benton. I am the attorney of record for Mrs. Clara Ridgemont. I am here to deliver a legal notice concerning the property you currently occupy." The room rippled with confusion. Vanessa's eyes widened. "What property?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. Harold lifted the deed. "This house," he said. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, almost luxurious. I watched the color drain from Vanessa's face. Darren took a step forward as if trying to read the papers from afar. "There must be some mistake," he said, but his voice wavered. Harold raised the second document, the addendum Samuel had signed years ago. "According to this binding agreement," he read aloud, "in the event that Mrs. Clara Ridgemont is subjected to emotional or physical mistreatment within her own home, all occupants who are not beneficiaries of her choosing are legally required to vacate the premises." A woman near Vanessa gasped. Another pressed her hand to her chest. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed like she was drowning in air. "Mistreatment?" she said, her voice trembling. "We never. This is ridiculous. She is exaggerating." Harold flipped a page and read, without inflection, the examples legally defined as mistreatment: forced displacement from her bedroom, destruction of sentimental property, exclusion from family functions, verbal degradation, and disregard for her well-being. Every eye in the room turned to Vanessa. She wilted under their stare. Darren's face reddened as he sputtered, "This is nonsense. We were just setting boundaries." Harold looked directly at him for the first time. "The law does not concern itself with your version of boundaries," he said. "The law concerns itself with evidence, and the evidence is substantial." Vanessa shook her head violently. "You cannot do this, Clara," she said, spitting my name like it was ash. "You cannot ruin our lives." I held her gaze. "I am not ruining anything," I said quietly. "You did that yourselves." Brianna, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Harold answered before I could. "You have 30 days to vacate. Mrs. Ridgemont will determine whether any of you may return." The living room erupted anger, denial, whispered judgment from the guests, who moments earlier had admired Vanessa's curated life. Darren tried one last time to argue, but Harold shut him down with a final, brutal truth. "The law does not care about your feelings," he said. "It cares about your actions." And in that moment, surrounded by all the people she had hoped to impress, Vanessa Rowan Crowley finally realized she had no power at all. In the days that followed, the house felt strangely quiet, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the consequences to unfold. I had known the truth would shake them, but I had not expected the ripples to travel so far, or so fast. News spreads quickly in small neighborhoods, especially when people realize they have been admiring a family built on carefully curated lies. It began with a short clip from the camera on the front porch, footage I had never asked for but Darren had installed years earlier. A neighbor, meaning no harm, asked if she could help me retrieve something from my trash bin and saw Vanessa hurling my belongings inside while Darren looked away. She sent the video to Marlene, who sent it to someone else, and by morning it had passed through the neighborhood group chat like wildfire. I became poor Clara, sweet Clara, the woman who deserved better, while Vanessa became something else entirely. Her friends, the same women who had attended her party with polished smiles and compliments, began withdrawing. Plans were canceled. Messages were left unread. Someone even commented publicly under one of her posts, asking if she felt proud bullying an old woman. In her office, the consequences were worse. Vanessa had been campaigning for a managerial promotion for months, telling anyone who would listen that she was overdue for recognition. But when HR was forwarded the video anonymously, of course her evaluation was postponed indefinitely. Her supervisor called her in and told her the company could not risk placing someone with a questionable record of empathy in a leadership role. She came home that night yelling so loudly the neighbors heard, accusing Darren, accusing me, accusing the universe for her downfall. Darren fared no better. His company prided itself on community responsibility, a phrase printed on their building, their website, and the coffee mugs they handed out at every event. When the video surfaced, along with whispers of him ignoring my injury and letting me sleep on a sofa, the regional manager decided he no longer aligned with the company's values. He told Darren they had no choice but to let him go. Elder neglect, even when not criminal, is a stain that does not wash off easily. Darren tried to argue, to insist it was exaggerated, but the company's reputation mattered more than his excuses. When he came home with the news, he blamed everyone except himself. I heard him pacing the hallway, muttering that people blew things out of proportion, that Mom did not look abused, as if the absence of bruises erased the cruelty. Brianna faced her own shock. She had been obsessed with joining the cheerleading team, practicing routines in the living room, posting videos for her friends. But teenagers can be merciless when they see weakness. And when the clip of her mocking me circulated among students, the school administration took notice. The coach called her in and told her that the team represented the school's image, and they could not allow someone recently involved in harassment to wear their uniform. Brianna cried, insisting she had done nothing wrong, that everyone talks like that, but the decision was final. Her friends distanced themselves too, some out of fear, some out of embarrassment. It was the first time I sensed she was learning what consequences felt like, though I took no pleasure in seeing a child crumble beneath the weight of her mother's example. Still, I could not deny the justice. Meanwhile, the 30-day notice loomed over them like a shadow. Vanessa tried to negotiate, tried to convince Harold she needed more time, but the addendum was clear and legally binding. They packed slowly at first, still hoping I might change my mind, but I had nothing left to give them. Not forgiveness, not permission to stay, not another piece of myself. With each passing week, the house returned to itself. I found letters of Samuel tucked behind drawers, a pair of earrings I thought I had lost, a cookbook with his handwriting in the margins. I reclaimed my space inch by inch while they shrank beneath the weight of their own choices. When moving day came, their new home was a run-down apartment complex on the outskirts of town, a place with peeling paint, paper-thin walls, and no yard for Darren to boast about. They loaded their boxes with stiff shoulders and tight lips, shooting me glances that mixed resentment with disbelief, as if they still could not understand how the world had shifted out from under them. Vanessa muttered something about karma being overrated. Darren avoided my gaze entirely. Brianna climbed into the car without a word, her face blotchy from crying. I watched them drive away, the engine sputtering as if even the car shared their exhaustion, and for the first time in a long while, I did not feel guilty. I felt something quieter and stronger. Balance. The kind of balance life rarely delivers, except in moments when truth finally catches up to those who have run from it too long. When the house finally grew quiet after they left, I walked through each room slowly, letting my fingers graze the walls the way one touches an old friend they feared they had lost. The silence was not heavy anymore. It was calm, steady, almost warm. I opened the curtains in the living room, letting the morning sun spill across the floorboards the way Samuel always liked. He used to say a house should greet the day, not hide from it. For the first time in years, I felt that greeting. I spent the next weeks undoing the harm they had done. I moved my bed back into its proper room, laying my crocheted blanket across it after Marlene helped me wash the dust from its edges. I rehung the wedding picture they tossed aside and placed Samuel's letters in the drawer beside my bed where they belonged. I scrubbed the kitchen until the counters gleamed, not because they were dirty, but because reclaiming them felt like reclaiming a part of myself. I planted new lavender by the kitchen window so the scent would fill the house at night the way it once did. Marlene Cooper became a frequent visitor, stopping by with fresh bread or peach cobbler, saying she just wanted to check in on me. Sometimes we would sit on the porch with our tea, talking about nothing and everything. She told me she always knew something was wrong, that she had seen the way Vanessa spoke to me when she thought no one paid attention. I thanked her for her quiet presence, because sometimes having someone bear witness is its own kind of comfort. One afternoon, I received a call from Elias Carter, the husband from the young couple I had always liked. He and Rowan had been saving for a home but could never find a place within their budget. I invited them over for tea and listened as they explained how they wanted a small, safe place to build their life. They reminded me so much of Samuel and myself when we were young, hopeful, determined, grateful for simple things. So I used part of my savings, the portion Samuel had set aside for something meaningful, and helped them put a down payment on their first house. Rowan cried. Elias tried not to, and I felt a swell of pride so deep it almost hurt. Helping them felt right, like passing on the kind of kindness I once received from life before it turned complicated. Weeks passed peacefully until one crisp morning, as I watered my new lavender, I heard slow footsteps on the walkway. I recognized the sound before I turned. Darren stood at the gate, shoulders slumped, looking thinner, older, smaller than I remembered. He held his hands clasped in front of him like a boy about to confess to breaking a window. "Mom," he said softly, "can we talk?" I hesitated, not out of anger but out of the memory of all the nights I had waited for him to look at me this way again. I opened the gate and nodded toward the porch. We sat down without speaking for a long moment. Finally, he drew in a shaky breath. "I am sorry," he said. "For everything. I should have protected you. I should have listened. I should have—" His voice cracked before he could finish. I watched him struggle, watched the weight of his choices settle onto his shoulders. And I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding of what I needed to say. I looked him in the eyes, steady and unshaken. "Darren," I said, "you did not just throw away my dress. You threw me away long before that." He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheek. "I know," he whispered. "I know, Mom, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. I did not reach for his hand. I did not comfort him the way I would have once done. Some lessons are not softened. Some truths must stand firm. What you receive now," I told him, "is what you cast out first. That is how life works." He nodded slowly, accepting what could not be undone. When he left, I felt neither vindictive nor bitter. I felt balanced, as if Samuel's hand rested on my shoulder, steadying me. That night, as the lavender scent drifted through my open window, I whispered the truth that had carried me through every dark day in that house. They threw away my dress, but God threw them a lesson. Thank you, dear ones, for sitting with me through this long road of memory, hurt, and finally, justice. Stories like mine are not just stories. They are reminders that silence has a voice, that patience has a limit, and that even the quietest woman in the room carries a truth strong enough to stand on its own feet. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something stir in your chest, whether sorrow, anger, or that small spark of hope that justice still finds its way home, then I invite you to stay close. This porch light of mine is always on. And if you would like to keep walking with me through the stories I have never told before, the ones I've held in my hands for longer than I can count, then please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Your support means more than you know. It helps these memories travel a little farther, helps old voices be heard in a world that often forgets them. So press that subscribe button, stay with me, and I will keep telling the truths time refused to bury. Until next time, sweetheart. Thank you for listening.